Bonjour Philippe Martinez.
So, good afternoon, Philippe Martinez, General Secretary of CGT. We are going through an unprecedented crisis, health crisis, economic and social crisis, and we can see the first spin-off effects. And with the CGT General Secretary, we would like to hear from you. French people will have their lives totally shaken. So wealth being created will decrease by 10%. The unemployment rate will be above 10%. And at the same time, we are talking about a new world. That's very often the case when we face unprecedented crises. There was a spirit of solidarity. Public services were restored. Working from home emerged. Decentralization is back on the agenda. And maybe social democracy has been able to cover some milestones. Of course, there will be some short-term challenges, massive restructuring programs, downsizing programs, lots of bankruptcies, and youth unemployment will increase. 700,000 young people will try to find a job on the labor market, and the health crisis is not yet over. Bear witness what is happening in other countries and also in France. In France, we are prudent. Some people would like to see a new world. It's an unprecedented crisis. There might be some short-term challenges, and in fact, maybe the world might not change altogether. So what is your take on that? So you have different kinds of emergencies. So what is important is to implement what the President of the Republic said during the crisis. He mentioned and touched upon different things, the public system, the health system that has to be beefed up, the first line, the second line of people who contributed to mitigating the crisis. And he talked about compensation payments. This is what is imperious. This is what is urgent. If we want to make sure that consumption to pick up, we know that people who are on the minimum wage, they don't save, they spend, and we shouldn't oppose employment and wages. This is what is urgent. Second, you have young people, and this is, we are in an urgent situation with young people. Unemployment has dropped. This is what the government said, but jobs are still insecure. The first victims of the health crisis are young people. So 300,000 temporary workers being unemployed over the past 2 months, and most of the time the young people had fixed-term contracts. So we have to make sure that people have long-term jobs. We need to revamp the economic and social model. This covers industries, the right of workers is at stake as well. So we were told that there will be lots of entrepreneurs, freelance people. So this trend is not reliable in the long term, and you have to think about the public services and health system. The health system is one of the best in the world, something that I've said repeatedly, but has been impaired, and COVID-19 exposed all the shortcomings and the weaknesses that have been highlighted by the health workers, qualifications on the wane, means and resources for the hospitals. So these are some short-term and long-term prospects. So the state helped lots of people, furloughing scheme, short-term working scheme, so guaranteed loans, social expenditure being postponed, payroll taxes being postponed. There are some European measures. Maybe European solidarity will have a role to play. And there will be a massive recovery plan that is announced for July. Furloughing schemes will continue to be implemented, even though the public compensation system will be less. And on the side of companies, trade unions are facing a different dilemma. So you have collective performance agreements. So one of your colleagues in the trade unions have said that these agreements are quite bitter. And it is true that employees prefer a job retention scheme instead of a performance plan that does not come. The Carambar plant closed down. And a few years ago, they moved from 37 hours to 39 hours in terms of a working week. And now the company is closed. So what is the position of employees and trade unions? These are thorny issues. Of course, they will be talking about employment, working conditions, and purchasing power. So what is your take on that? Many people have criticized our social system in different circles among employers. Even the President of the Republic criticized the state. Of course, Edouard Philippe's government hasn't invented the short-term working procedures and the furloughing schemes. So we have a good health system. It's an asset. It is not a drawback. This is something that we need to remind people of, because very often it is said the opposite. Moreover, government helped massively companies, but once again, so how these measures, these incentives are managed. So aerospace, 10 billion euros being given, but jobs are cut. And the same goes for the automotive industry. So state aid, i.e., taxes. If a state aid is used to increase unemployment, it means that things haven't changed. And they've been talking about agility, competitiveness agreements. I mean, they've been using different words. And I've been with CGT for quite a long time, and they've been using the same words, the same terminology. Bear witness what is happening with the smart company. So if employees have to work more because of competitiveness issues, this is something that has been repeated by different government representatives, and if they make efforts and a site is being closed as a reward, this is their world before COVID-19. So I think that we need to take stock of the situation before in order to avoid repeating the errors and mistakes. We should come up with a new rationale so companies can be helped, but they should deliver good results in terms of employment, because when you give some incentives to people, unemployment increases, all the shareholders can make a good profit. So at Smart, they contended with some difficulties. For example, the employees were divided. Executives were in favor of the program, and blue collars voted against the program, the blueprint. So employees and employers are torn apart. So I don't think that it's possible to negotiate against this background. And I think that the state should come up with another course, and some companies shouldn't have too much room for maneuver. So I think we need to think about solidarity between the subcontractors and the employers, and the subcontractors will suffer quite a lot. We should adopt another rationale in terms of employment, in terms of payments, in terms of incentives, so in terms of mobility. So these are some avenues that we would like to put forward to the government. There's a cabinet reshuffle as we speak. We have a new prime minister. Before the health crisis, there were two iconic reforms. One reform was adopted by the government, employment insurance scheme, and then there was another reform, the pension reform. Everybody thinks that the top priority is employment, and it's important to have a good recovery plan, but it will be tortuous, chaotic, and the recovery won't be easy. Regarding the two reforms, pension reform and insurance employment insurance scheme. So how can we deal with that? So combating unemployment should mobilize everybody. So all trade unions are against the reform. It's very infrequent. So, and I think that the government and the President of the Republic wanted to impose their reforms forcefully. So the government decided to postpone the pension reform and the unemployment insurance schemes. Social stabilizers are important. Industrial stabilizers are important. I mean, maintaining the employment insurance scheme is the world before. So when you are unemployed, it's not because you want it. It's not a job being unemployed. So it's important to increase unemployment allocations, especially for people who are young. When they get their first job. What about apprenticeship? Regarding apprenticeship, some companies should be able to welcome apprentices. That's good. But what is much more important is for apprentices to find a job after the apprenticeship. So basically, you will be given some incentives so that you can help apprentices, but afterwards you will have to reciprocate. High apprentices should be able to get a job in the company where they followed their apprenticeship. We've been talking about industry, relocation. So what is the use to consider again some measures that have been conducive to strikes? So I don't know if it is the third phase for the government. I mean, we don't know exactly what was the second phase, but what is important is to avoid conflicts. And the President of the Republic, if he continues to go it alone, everybody will be hostile to him. So there are some trade unions, such as CFDT, they said, we are in favor of pension reform, but that's not timely. That's not the right moment to embark upon a pension reform. So we don't want to create rifts. There were rifts before the COVID-19 pandemic. So public services have been rehabilitated because of the health crisis management, and you've noticed the commitment of health workers, medical workers. So the weight of territories, the weight of regions, the weight of mayors is key. We need to think about public services and how the country is organized. The state is quite centralized. Some health agencies played a key role. For example, that of Île-de-France. Other agencies were criticized. Maybe we should revamp decentralization, and we need to think about the balance between local authorities, regional authorities, and territories. And I think that in terms of labor relations, industrial relations, we need to reconsider the whole process, especially in the industry, in the different sectors, and also in the territories. So those who were criticizing public services and the hospital sector were very thankful for what health workers did. But of course, it's important to take into account all the proposals put forward by the trade unions. So there are four issues: income, degree recognition. When you've got you are at the university and 3 years of education after the A level, people are not really well paid. So you have to consider the question of employment. And what is important is to have a good regional or territorial meshing. So I think that the state should avoid compounding territorial imbalances. So it's necessary to have laws. I've talked about degrees of nurses. So in a region, nurse a degree for a nurse, I mean, should be equivalent from one region to another. So I think that it's important to revamp the territorial meshing. I mean, some hospitals shouldn't close, maternity wards shouldn't close, but all territories are different. So I think that the regional health agencies, they are conveying the directives or directions of the Ministry of Economy. So when I go to hospitals, I meet staff people, and they show me some pie charts, histograms on spending reduction. They don't talk about the number of lives being saved, and they don't talk about the way people are being cured and cared for. So there should be national cohesion in all public services, and from these national rules, it's important to have a look at the territorial, regional idiosyncrasies, because a big conurbation has different issues to rural areas.
In terms of social organization in companies, something is going to completely overturn things. The massive development of work from home, which we saw to great extent during the crisis, we know it's not for all the workers, about a third of the wage earners. I believe Daniel Cohen, an economist, said recently that with the digital transformation, this is as important a revolution as working on the line last century. So it means a difference between in the organization of a private versus professional life, less time in transportation, depending obviously on the pressure exercised on the workers. We know it can deepen the gap between those who can benefit from work from home and those who can't because of their job. It cuts people off from the community, because a company is also a collective project. It can stop the movement, and it can also be a source of gain in productivity, which is ill controlled by the worker. How does the CGT and the various unions position themselves concerning that? Some are enthusiastic about work from home, and some criticize what it gave rise to during the crisis, and how can we and how is it going to change the relationship between workers? Well, we talk a lot about work from home with this crisis. We have to make a difference between work from home and remote work. Working from home means taking care of your children who weren't going to school, and this is not the best thing. It means sharing a computer with 3 or 4 people, because if the couple, if both are working from home and you only have one computer, it's a problem. So this kind of temping requires a new definition. We asked MEDEF to do this, and we need a redefinition. Work from home or remote work doesn't mean additional hours or masked additional hours. And what we need is an interprofessional national agreement on this. Second thing, remote work cannot be something that is done 5 or 7 days a week. We do believe in the collective aspect of work to avoid social division, and also because the wealth of a collective aspect has been proven. For many years, we have been talking about the work in teams. When I was working at Renault, this is what people were talking. Well, then people furthered the open spaces, and then with this system, everybody is isolated. And then some workers feel that instead of spending 2 hours in commuting, they prefer to stay home. But rather than staying home, maybe we should review mobility. We should improve the offer of transportation, collective transport, in order to save time in commuting. So So we need to take stock of the situation and redefine things. What I do note is that some companies already had this in mind, and with the crisis, they're already going to get some gains in productivity. I can hear some corporate leaders saying, well, we have to pay less rent because we need less office space. And this is important. It also means a division, dividing the staff, opposing people. Because you need to recognize the qualifications and how can you contact each other to know in one given project who got an increase, who didn't. So for reunions, it represents an additional challenge. But companies should evolve on this topic. I'm also in a company where a lot of colleagues are working in a project manner in other cities, other countries. So the staff representatives must be able to travel. The net or the internet shouldn't be devoted only to work, but they must be used for the staff. We have lots of ideas. Yes, I can hear that. Another problem appeared during the crisis, the balance between the ecological, environmental issues and the social and economic issues. We've heard people who were enthusiastic and showing that all this could be reconciled easily, but in real life, it's a bit more complicated. We see that in the car industry or the aircraft industry, the fact that you should reduce the footprint for tomorrow, it's a bit complicated. Cars and planes are a good example. You were talking about Renault, which you know well. I was hearing the other day Dominique Senard, who, even though he gives preference to hybrid motors and electrical motors, was saying that maybe we exited the diesel world a bit too fast and that it had heavy impact. I heard someone saying a while ago that the rules were quite limiting for the car industry and that we shouldn't increase them. And if you want to modify the territories, the first thing you should do now with this health crisis is to save the companies. So you have to find the right balance. And if we want to shift towards a green growth for tomorrow, we might have to support the workers. Maybe with the turning point I mentioned a few years ago, 20 years ago, they were talking about a heavy transition, but we can see that it will mean a difficult balance to highlight, to find. What is the position of CGT? Well, we refuse to oppose the old industry and the industry of the future because it leads to many problems. You have some companies that have invested, or if they invest, can become companies of the future or are companies of the future while preventing the environment. I mentioned it to the French president and to those who were ministers up till now. For example, Luxair, which makes bottles for oxygen, closed up because it's not profitable enough. I'm not saying it's not profitable. I'm saying it's not profitable enough. So they closed up, making several unemployed because of medical issues. You have the example of La Chapelle d'Arbec. On paper, it's a great industry. It's a company that recycles paper, makes biomass with the waste next to the Seine River, next to a freight station. So you must have examples to reconcile the industry and the environment, and we have lots of them. Unfortunately, the government considers that you have the old industry that should be closed up, and you have a new industry to be invented. So you have industries where, the staff shouldn't be paying for the mistakes of the leaders. Yes, you must invest in the car industry. You have electrical cars. You have the hybrid motors, which haven't been developed sufficiently in France, even though in France they're doing it now, at least one brand. They're more appropriate for rural areas. They reduce the level of pollution while enabling people to have a new approach for the fuel motor. You know, for Renault, the small non-polluting cars, none of them is made in France. So you can have questions, including their relocation or reshoring. So you must have a good vision of the industry. You must do some relocation and reshoring. But CGT is supporting a project for developing medical images. This has been true for 10 years. There's been several ministers, including Emmanuel Macron, but we still haven't got this sector. This is a modern industry. We have qualified people, and it's an industry of the future, as the recent crisis has shown. Well, as you're talking about this, let me come back to it. We have now seen with the crisis the national or European sovereignty challenges faced with China, in the face of China, the challenges of industry reshoring. Well, two questions to this. Can companies accept a lower profitability rate if you develop an activity with obviously higher cost of labor in countries such as ours? And secondly, the consumer who's enjoying the prices emanating from this recent relocation, are they ready to pay a higher price? And behind all that, as I'm talking about solidarity and European scale sovereignty, don't you think we could build a new syndicalism tomorrow, not only in France, but at European level? Well, that's many questions, in fact. If people have the means to consume products that respect both the environment and society, i.e. More expensive products, they will. But so the issue is purchasing power. And second thing, the syndicates at European and global level have been fighting to have a minimum, a European minimum wage. We're making progress, but we're not that yet. We're in favor of a social and environmental protectionism, free competition, really. ILO is part of the UN, the International Labour Organization. They defend the right to be member of the union. You know, if only in the public tenders we had these rules respected, some countries and some companies, I won't name names, but you know whom I mean, would not have access to public markets. So I'm in favor of social and environmental protectionism, and this is an avenue to be explored. Not to say we want to retain our privileges, as some people tend to say, but to put all the political leaders of the world in front of their responsibilities and to say, okay, if we want to access other markets, please increase our salaries, let us be members of unions, let us go on strike, etc. So it would be interesting if companies had a lower margin, but and the shareholder had a little less money. They're not going to sleep under the bridge, huh? And do you have any common idea to reach this type of objective? I can see an evolution. This is reaching more and more countries. There's still some blockages in the Scandinavian countries, Nordic countries. But I feel that the unions will very soon be able to produce a basic text to fight social dumping, have European minimum wage, and we won't oppose the cost of labor. In this way, we need this social and environmental protectionism to avoid social and environmental dumping. This is how we'll save jobs and the planet. Thank you very much, Philippe Martinez. Thank you, sir.